Hi everyone, hoping that you all are well. This is Dr. Tracy McCarthy. We're going to be looking at this symbol Z and deconstructing it. So we're going to be delving into some symbology here. Now, if you recall, with respect to symbols, any piece of media, you have this dynamic of polysemy. So you have multiple meanings attached to every single thing. And so you have these symbols with layers. So you have these manifest dynamics going on with symbols. You have latent dynamics going on with symbols. You have meaning that is coming from the sender or the creator of the symbol. And then you have the individuals who are receiving the symbol and giving it their own meaning. And so there are a variety of ways of understanding even a single symbol. And you can have multiple people looking at that same symbol, seeing multiple things. And so, of course, in looking at symbology, you also have to take into consideration what are known as those subliminal dynamics that are just below consciousness. As a starting point, we need to acknowledge the fact that most experience with this Z symbol has been through mediated reality. In other words, most people have not been up close and personal with this Z. They haven't seen individuals next to them wearing this Z. They haven't been wearing the Z themselves. And so many people who have experienced the Z, they have experienced it through media. So there has been something in between them and the actual Z, and generally some sort of screen or some sort of photographic dynamic. And so that's what you have. Even when you see it on the screen here, this is mediated multiple times. And so many people have not experienced this Z firsthand. Now you have many media makers asking the question about this symbol Z. And you have this tweet indicating you can see Z on these guys' clothes. What does it mean? It's noteworthy that the individuals depicted in this mediated piece, these individuals are understood as Gen Z. There's even a narrative that this is an organic depiction of individuals who are ill and their caretakers coming outside in the snow, in the cold, to make this Z symbol in order to show some sort of solidarity. Again, this is a mediated dynamic, and so we don't really know what took place. We don't even know where this is. We don't know if it's organic. We don't know who the actual creators are in terms of the people standing there. We don't know who they are. We don't know who took this picture, this aerial picture. And so we don't really have a lot of information about the creators of this message or the senders of the message. All we have are the receivers of the message at this point. And so before we go any further, we're just going to make some observations about the Russian alphabet. There are 33 letters indicated in the Russian alphabet. One thing that is noteworthy is that the letter Z is absent from the Russian alphabet. And so you see something that looks like the English A up at the top. And then at the bottom, you see something that looks like an English R that's reversed. And believe it or not, we're going to trace this R right back to that Z. And here are some additional Slavic letters. And again, you can see that you don't see a Z. You see something that looks like that A up in the top left-hand corner. And then at the bottom, again, you see that what looks like a backwards R. Moving right along, this gets a little bit more involved. Up at the top left-hand corner, you see something that does look like a Z. And then at the bottom, you see something that looks like a lowercase r. And so in keeping with Batman DC comic themes, we have a riddle. And yesterday, we had the word of the day was riddle. And this is in keeping with this Batman theme of the Riddler. And so what we have here in terms of a riddle, this word of the day from Merriam-Webster, is that a riddle is a mystifying, misleading, or puzzling question. And so this misleading, mystifying, puzzling question revolves around this symbol Z. Now we're going to generally refer to it as a symbol Z, although in English, many people, of course, will just simply understand it as the letter Z, but you will see why we are using the word symbol with respect to this and not simply the letter. And so this Z has multiple meanings attached to it. And so we're going to examine some of these meanings. We're not going to do an exhaustive examination, but we are going to delve into some important meanings that are attached to this particular symbol. If you look on the right-hand side, you will see a number of letters indicating sounds associated with this symbol when it's considered a letter. And you can see these different ways of spelling this sound of Z sound. And so you can see the Z, the TS, the DZ, and the S. As we've already indicated, this Z is going to trace to that R that we just saw. Not only that reverse R, but the R going in the direction that you would typically expect it to be going in the English language. And so what you have here also is that Z is correlated with I. Z is correlated with the number 1, sevens. You can actually see 2 sevens. If you look at this Z creatively, you can see a 7 upside down and then 1 right side up. Also related to 0 and practically anything that starts with a Z would be representing. Z represents number, and specifically it represents the number of protons that are in the nucleus of an atom. So it represents the atomic number. It also represents X. Yes, X marks the spot. It represents omega. It represents top. And also, very interestingly, this Z is correlated with what is known as ego sum. So we're going to start off with looking at this symbol Z as simply the letter Z in terms of the English language. And so when you look at the letter Z in terms of the English language, you have Z as the 26th letter of the alphabet. And so when you go from A to Z, you're going from the alpha to the omega, with the A being the alpha, and then the Z representing omega, or the end point. And so in terms of the English language, English speakers, when they see this Z, what might automatically come up is this idea of the omega, or the idea of the end point in terms of the end of that string of letters. Now, of course, if you recall the contrast between Omicron and Omega, you remember that Omega actually is the big something, whereas Omicron, micron, is seen as the little something. And so that's another way of understanding Omega and Z. So we're doing basically a Freudian free association as we do this. Okay, so you see in Merriam-Webster that Omega, Z, means the end of something, the conclusion of something, the completion of something, the termination of something, the winding up of something, the cessation of something. And here again, you can see very clearly when you are looking at synonyms for omega, Z is one of the synonyms. It's the first synonym for omega. So omega and Z are synonymous. And so they are also synonymous with things like termination, close, and finish, and ending. And so mathematically, you could put equal signs in between all of these things. You also have this dynamic where Z is also represented by what looks like the capital letter I, or this understanding of 1. And you see in the Phoenician, this is also written in a similar way in terms of the Hebrew, in terms of the pronunciation. This Zion, when you look at the Phoenician, that's the one over on the left-hand side. The Etruscan looks very similar. The Greek gets a little bit more variety there with zeta. But again, you see this Zion, and that actually equals in the Hebrew alphabet the seventh letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And so you have this I, this 1, this 7, this Zion, this Zeta. Okay, so up at the top, when you look at the Hebrew detection for that symbol that looks like a lowercase r, you see that it translates into the English as this uppercase P. If you look at the history of the letter P and the letter R, you will see that those two letters are closely related. And so you also see at the bottom that Zayin being the seventh letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's noted also that that Zayin sounds like Z-I-O-N, which is Zion. And so let's quickly look at some direct translations. And so you see this Z, this capital Z, with the pronunciation of Z that you see at the bottom, translating into the Russian as the capital letter Z. And so it looks the same. But remember, there is no Z in the Russian language, but there is something that sounds like Z in the Russian language. And here you can see that the Z coming from the English into the Russian, when you drop down, you have that backwards looking R, which of course is synonymous in terms of the structure with the R, the standard R that's in the English language. You have a similar dynamic when you go from the French into the Russian. And so when you go from the French into the Russian with this Z, this particular Z that came out of the Russian translation, what you end up with again is that backwards looking R. So when it's in the French, it looks like a Z. When it's in the English, it looks like a Z. But the actual way it looks in Russian is an R. And so even though there may be Z's on those trucks and Z's on their t-shirts, that Z may actually represent what looks like this backwards R. And here you see again, when you go from English into Hebrew with that Z, it again looks like that lowercase r in terms of this Z. You see the same dynamic going from English to Yiddish. Going deeper into this polysemy, you see a number of interesting dynamics here. So you know that the Z translates to what looks like this backwards R. This backwards R in terms of Russian is a translation of I. It is a translation of ego. It is understood as Yah. Going further, you see this translation back and forth between the English and the Russian with this letter that looks like an upside down L essentially, or it sometimes looks like a lowercase r. And what you see here is going from the English into the Russian, you see that you have this lowercase r looking dynamic in the Russian, but it's also translating to G. Sometimes it's translating to the lowercase g, and then sometimes it's translating to the uppercase G, as in gamma, as in nanotesla. And so here you see some other dynamics with respect to this reverse R. And what you see is that this R is translating with respect to Russian, as Ya or Ja. And so this Z is equal to this reverse R. It's equal to Ya. It's equal to Ja. And here you can see Ya or Ja, and then the parenthetical, which is basically that backwards R. And you even have the manifestation of this with the English Russia being translated into Russian. And when you look at the end of Russia in the Russian, you see that ya. You see that reverse R, and then you see that sound of ya. Now check this out. When you go from that reverse R in Russian and then you translate it into the English, we have yet again that I, that ego. And remember, we are tracing this to, in one instance, to the dynamic of the ego sum. And as you can see, when you do the ego sum, I am, it translates into that reverse R in Russian. And so Z in this framework is equal to that reverse R. Z is equal to I. Z is equal to ya and ja. And Z is equal to I am. And you can see this more clearly here. If you look at the Russian going on to the English and the drop down, you see it drops down as I am for that reverse R. And of course, when you look over on the left-hand side on the bottom, you see the I am is equating to ya. What's noteworthy is that this is all also tied to what we just discussed with respect to Sodom and Gomorrah. There are some numerical equations sometimes inside of Strong's Concordance, and this is one of those indications. Now, if you've done any research on Gomorrah and what happened to Gomorrah, we know Gomorrah is representing ruin and devastation. One thing about Gomorrah is that it seems to be associated with this idea of being submerged under water, overwhelmed, inundated by water. And this seems to tie into a mythos that may not be mythos related to Lyonesse on the west coast of Europe. Okay, so back to this dynamic. If you see in the middle of this discussion, you see that what looks like that lowercase r with an equal sign. We're going to talk about what's on the other side of that equal sign. But you can also see here that even in this discussion about Gomorrah, there are notations about this place being associated with a particular form of worship. And so some of the debauchery that is intimated with respect to Sodom and Gomorrah appears to be related to dynamics associated with a particular form of worship or worshiping a particular entity. And if you look down at the bottom at the forms and transliterations, you see that upside down L or that R looking dynamic. It's also important to remember that when you see the G, it can be interchanged with a C. So this is very similar to betacism with the B and the V. Now there's this very odd dynamic in terms of defining Gomorrah. And so in defining Gomorrah in Strong's Concordance, you see this equation. And again, that equation looks like either an upside down L or a lowercase r. And then you see the equal sign, and then you see what's on the other side of the equal sign. Now we are going to look at what is on the other side of this equal sign, which is relating to this Z. And so now, in addition to the other symbols we've looked at, when you look at these symbols in this equation that is inside of Strong's Concordance, that is in reference to Gomorrah, what comes up is the gamma function. And so you have on the left side of the equation what is supposed to be representing Gomorrah. And then on the other side of the equation, you have a square root of something dynamic. And so what you find when you trace this is that what comes up in terms of these symbols is the gamma function. And the gamma function is understood as being related to the gamma ray. And so over on the right-hand side, you see an offering related to the gamma ray. But you also see on the left-hand side this symbol that looks like that upside down L or that lowercase r being associated with Z. And you can clearly see those two sevens when you see the Z written in this form. It's unclear why this equation is sitting in Strong's Concordance. There have been some offerings related to what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah being perhaps related to a gamma ray dynamic, but it's still unclear exactly why that is in Strong's Concordance that way, because it is saying that it is essentially equal to that. And so you have some information here from this particular source indicating that gamma rays are related to the electromagnetic spectrum. The gamma rays are the hottest and most energetic dynamics going here, and they are related to explosions such as nuclear explosions and lightning. And what you see here is that this gamma ray burst is considered the most energetic and most luminous, and it's synonymous with the Big Bang. Now, this particular dynamic is so powerful that it is seen as having the ability to release more energy, according to this source, in 10 seconds than our sun can or will emit in an entire 10 billion year life cycle. And this is additional information if you want to check it out related to gamma rays and black holes. Now, these are supposed to be depictions of gamma ray bursts. And these are a couple of sources that you can check out if you want to learn a little bit more about gamma rays and the substance that is related to gamma rays, which is radium. And of course, with radium, you have the capital letter R. There are a few things to also note with respect to radium. And you can see that radium has the atomic number of 88. It's also written in a way that looks like Ra, which of course translates to that Egyptian sun god. You can also see when you look on the right-hand side there that radium is luminescent, and so it glows. And here you can see in the translation from the English into the Russian, in keeping with what we saw in Strong's Concordance there in terms of that equation, you see the gamma ray written in English translates to what looks like gamma in Russian with that upside down L or that R. You can also see in terms of ray that in Russian you see it as LUCH, which of course is referring to light. Now, what we can see with respect to this symbol Z, this riddle, this puzzle, is that there are multiple esoteric dynamics with respect to this symbol Z. And so, because there has not been an immediate offering of what this symbol is supposed to be representing, there is the indication that it is meant to be mysterious. And so, as you can see, it has multiple potential meanings, and some of them are extremely evocative, particularly when you're looking at the dynamics with respect to these numbers, these letters, and also this idea of the ego sum specifically. As we wrap up this symbolic analysis of the symbol Z, you can see that there is quite a bit of polysemy with respect to this symbol. And so you have some manifest dynamics, you have some latent dynamics. One thing that is missing is context, because the one thing that is missing in this whole equation is the creator of the symbol. Who created the symbol? What was the purpose of creating the symbol? What was supposed to be communicated with respect to this symbol? Remembering that this letter Z does not exist in the Russian alphabet, and so therefore it's a symbol. And so we don't know who the creator is. We don't know the intention of the creator. We don't know how people came to embrace this particular symbol and what it means to the individuals embracing it and wearing it. Now, we don't have to know all of that because the understanding of the receiver is just as important as the understanding of the sender of a message. And so one is not particularly more important than the other. You know, both entities are analyzing and interpreting these symbols based upon a number of dynamics. And so we're going to wrap this up here. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.